Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. The budget is before us. Are we going to go to 330? The numbers are so staggering. $1 trillion. We have 20 trillion and more coming. And the question is, can we stop it? The Secretary of the Treasury is asking for relief that he can raise the debt ceiling. We also have the story about a tragic crash of a 737 MAX plane in Ethiopia, killing everybody on board. And there's tragedy as Venezuela continues its downward spiral. When are we going to do something about it? Well, we'll have all those stories for you on this edition of the program. So let's get started with the news. Venezuela is literally in darkness. 5 days of blackouts are worsening the country's humanitarian crisis. And President Maduro blames the United States. He's not going to blame himself. He says it's a cyber attack. Yeah, in your dreams. Terry.
Well, the power outages are affecting grocery stores, hospitals, causing outrages, food spoils, and medical patients suffer. Amber Strong has the story from Washington.
The country of Venezuela is in the dark, its power grid failing as an ongoing power struggle rocks the nation. It's been 5 days since the city of Caracas went black, worsening an already devastating humanitarian crisis. Food is already scarce. No power means no refrigeration.
We are very sad because our food is being spoiled and we have to buy strategically.
Local hospitals are running on generators. This father stands in line to collect water from the river mountain.
I have my family, my wife. I have to go out looking. I'm not here because I want to be.
Opposition leader Juan Guaido claims 17 have died as a result of the blackout. He's placing the blame squarely at the feet of leader Nicolas Maduro and urging the Venezuela military to intervene.
High Command, will you continue hiding the dictator when you know a viable solution is not possible with him?
But Maduro says the prolonged blackouts are a result of a U.S. cyber attack.
The macabre strategy of this attack on the electrical system is to take our people to a level of despair.
The socialist country has been in a downward economic spiral for years. Venezuela's National Assembly voted Guaido the country's leader, claiming Maduro stole the recent elections. National Security Advisor John Bolton believes the tide is turning for the U.S.-backed Guaido.
I think momentum is on Guaido's side. Reports in the press that stress the military hasn't shifted miss the point entirely. They have not sought to arrest Guaido and the National Assembly and the opposition. And I think one reason for that is that Maduro fears if he gave that order, it would not be obeyed.
Last week, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tweeted, "No food, no medicine, now no power. Next, no Maduro." But so far, there's been no official word of U.S. military intervention. Amber Strong, CBN News in Washington.
Sooner or later, we're going to have to intervene. I don't think the United States should be the intervener, but I think the nations of Latin America need to get together and say this is one of ours and enough is enough. We can't allow those people to suffer for so much longer. I might add, Operation Blessing is looking at sending a convoy of food with tons and tons of food into Venezuela from out in Colombia. So if the Maduro people will allow the humanitarian aid to come in, so far they've blocked it. Well, in other news, the crash of a Boeing 737 MAX 8 in Ethiopia is raising concerns over the airliner. John Jessup has more on that story from the CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
That's right, Pat. China, Indonesia, and Ethiopia are all grounding their fleet of Boeing 737 MAX 8 planes following the crash of an Ethiopian Airlines jet that killed all 157 people on board Sunday, including 8 Americans. The planes are under scrutiny now for this crash and another in Indonesia just 4 months ago, both the same type. Boeing says the investigation is still in its early stages and is sending a technical team to the crash site to help Ethiopian and American investigators. The FAA will also assist and monitor the investigation. Investigators, Pat, have recovered the plane's black box, but it is damaged.
Well, from a word we had earlier, there was something in the autopilot that took control of the plane And instead of letting it go up, it went down and took control away from the pilots. We don't know if that's the case, but there's a technical flaw. It's not one of those big deals, but it's enough big deal to wreck the plane. And we can't have people flying in planes like that. The 737 is the workhorse. They've had it for years, and it's supposed to be a advanced copy of the 737. And so Boeing is a great big company, and this is a black eye they've got to get rid of. John?
Pat, Democrats warn President Trump's budget request for another $8 billion for a border wall could lead to another government shutdown. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer releasing a statement saying Congress refused to fund his wall, and he was forced to admit defeat and reopen the government. The same thing will repeat itself. We hope he learned his lesson. This request is in addition to the $8 billion the president designated for border security in his national emergency declaration. The president's budget proposal also cuts spending and balances the budget. The White House Budget Office saying it includes $2.7 trillion in spending cuts and erases the deficit in 15 years, with the national debt topping $22 trillion. CBN's White House correspondent Ben Kennedy explains why some Washington leaders consider a threat to a national security.
While lawmakers often describe this as a fiscal crisis, Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats added another level of concern to the national debt, calling the situation unsustainable. The country continues to add billions in debt each day, and just last week, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin asked Congress to raise the federal limit ASAP. What do we need to do to stop it from hitting $23 trillion?
Well, I hate to tell you, but it is headed to $23 trillion. Neither party seems to be able to do anything to stop this inexorable crisis of national debt.
One of Trump's former economic advisors believes nothing short of a war on wasteful spending will change the tide. Is there a way to break away from this use it or lose it spending spree?
Well, there's always a what we call fourth quarter spending, where agencies, if they haven't spent all the money they were allocated by Congress, they furiously try to spend money on it. It doesn't even matter what they spend it on. The money just flows out the door.
Moore says we need to change that. One way, to offer incentives, even some bonus to lawmakers who find ways to cut spending.
The problem is the incentives in Washington are to increase your spending, because that's how you get a budget increase the next year.
That's how the U.S. federal debt reached $22 trillion and is still growing.
I don't think good growth policies have to obsess necessarily about the budget deficits and so forth. Look, Chris, my view, and I believe the view of the administration, we are going to point a steady glide path towards lower federal spending and federal borrowing as a share of the economy, as a share of GDP.
Kudlow recommends growing the economy to the max by not raising taxes, offering incentives like Moore suggested, and encouraging business confidence.
Congress and the president should insist that in exchange for raising that debt ceiling, we have spending cuts that make sure we're not going to $30 trillion over the next decade.
The Treasury Department will most likely run out of money to pay the nation's bill by the end of September, which means Congress will have to take action which will only add to the growing debt. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
Pat, will they ever get the debt under control?
Not unless the mindset changes. You know, it is so easy to tax and spend. That was the theory of Harry Hopkins during the Roosevelt administration. Tax and spend, elect and elect, tax and spend, elect and elect. That was the formula for getting reelected. And people don't want to hear that their share of the pie is being cut. It doesn't matter who they are, where they are. They say, well, yeah, take it from him, but don't take it from me. And it's time that we realize we've got to have shared sacrifice, but it's not sacrifice. These are things that are being spent by the government that is just crazy. Absolutely crazy, and they've got to stop it. But each congressman wants a piece of the pie for his or her district, and it's got to stop. But this perverse incentive that says if you haven't spent the money by the end of the year, you're going to lose it, and it means you'll come back with a lesser piece of the pie. That is wrong as well. Something's got to be done to change it. But, ladies and gentlemen, we are mortgaging the future of our children, and we cannot sustain it. And I think the greatest danger right now facing our nation is the fact that we're going to be bankrupt, and when we lose our reserve currency status and people won't buy our bonds anymore, then it's going to be horrible. You have no idea how bad it's going to be. But we look down there to Venezuela, you can get a little piece of what it's going to be like if you mismanage your economy. And it's really terrible. But anyhow, we also find that it's a strange thing when a young woman with no particular education to speak of, who's had a career, I believe, as a, a bartender, I think, she suddenly is making pronouncements about climate change. Now she's making a pronouncement about capitalism. And the thing is, the media is following it like she's some guru from off the Mount Olympus. And she just doesn't know what she's talking about. John.
Pat, Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says capitalism is irredeemable. Speaking at the South by Southwest conference in Austin, the 29-year-old first-term House member says capitalism is the root cause of income inequality in America.
At the end of the day, as workers and as people of society, we're the ones creating wealth, not a corporate CEO. It's not a CEO that's actually creating $4 billion a year. It is the millions of workers in this country that's creating billions of dollars of economic productivity a year.
Cortez says she doesn't want to abolish capitalism, but make it more democratic. She also said people shouldn't fear government intrusion on business. And she criticized past presidents, calling FDR's New Deal racist and accusing Ronald Reagan of pitting white working-class people against minorities. Well, turning overseas, the Muslim nation of Azerbaijan recently welcomed more than a dozen evangelical pastors for an official visit. But why would the president of a Muslim nation be interested in evangelical Christians? CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell explains.
Azerbaijan is located on the Caspian Sea, bounded on the north by Russia and south by Iran. But this former Soviet republic, where Shiite and Sunni Muslims intermarry, and Christians and Jews live freely, believes that tolerance is the way to go.
Dialogue is very important during this time because in different parts of the world, we are witnessing lots of conflicts and wars, which makes it necessary for establishing dialogue.
Government Minister Mubarak Gurbanli hosted the group of 15 evangelical leaders and a rabbi.
We are part of the Muslim countries, but despite this fact, we are also home for 3 different religions. That's the importance of this event.
Gurbanli told CBN News his country is leading this dialogue because of its history. Azerbaijan hosted many religions over the centuries, including Judaism and Christianity, before Islam arrived 800 years ago.
That's why history gives us a good opportunity to bring up the ideas of tolerance and mutual understanding.
It started when Azeri President Ilham Aliyev invited American Rabbi Mark Schneier to bring evangelical leaders to his country. Schneier, who has been working to improve Jewish-Muslim relations for 15 years, teamed up with Robert Stearns to create a better understanding between Christians and Muslims. Going to Azerbaijan was the natural first step.
There are 57 Muslim nations. Azerbaijan has led the effort in terms of presenting a more progressive, a more centrist, a more inclusive, a more welcoming Islam that is supportive of the State of Israel.
I believe it's an extraordinary moment in the kingdom of God where God is moving behind the scenes in ways that we can't imagine.
The group met in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. Their first stop was the state cemetery and the Alley of Martyrs, where civilians massacred in a Soviet crackdown in 1990 are buried. The Grand Mufti of the Caucasus region told the group establishing relationships is not based on religion, but on common humanity. He later hosted the group for dinner at his palace, and the pastors were moved.
What really has surprised me the most is the level of communication, relationship, and it seems like genuine friendship between the various major faiths that are in this country. You just don't see that. Even in the United States, we seem to have a lot of intolerance right now.
Schneier said he believes this is a first step toward reconciliation between Muslims and evangelicals. Stearns called it an opportunity for the kingdom.
This could be a moment of wonderful blessing for Azerbaijan. So I'm inviting the church, the Christian church worldwide, to pray with me that this is an hour for the glory of the Lord to come to this nation.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
Pat, between Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and now Azerbaijan, it looks like we're seeing more movement between evangelicals and Muslims.
Won't be any question about it. I think that that's coming about. We're beginning to understand there's got to be some type of reconciliation, and that's lovely. Baku, by the way, is storied in the past. It was the capital of oil. It was, you notice, you used to see all those derricks out there. It was just flowing with oil, and it was loaded with people who were in the oil business, and it was a center of oil. I might add, in terms of oil, I believe from what I've been reading, the United States has finally surpassed Saudi Arabia as the leader of oil production. And the major companies are going into the Permian Basin. Exxon and Mobil and others are going into the Permian big time because they think that is the center of a tremendous deposit of oil. And they're using this fracking and the new techniques of extracting oil from shale. And the United States is now, from what I understand, #1 in the world, surpassing Saudi Arabia. So you go back to Baku, you're looking at the early days of the oil business when the oil was flowing so freely out of the Caspian Sea. And Baku was the center of an incredible boom in oil. So now if they're the center of an incredible boom of humanity and love, that's good news. Terry?